The January 9th, 2012 Littleton City Planning Commission. It's a special study session, and can we get a roll call, Glenn?
Commissioner Bagnall? Here. Commissioner Buckenstedt?
Here.
Commissioner Coronado?
Here.
Commissioner Elrod?
Here.
Nufinky?
Here.
Commissioner Metcalf?
Here.
Commissioner Ranville?
Here.
And Commissioner Samuelson.
Here.
You have quorum.
Great. The first, any changes to the agenda? No?
If I could just mention one thing, I would like to mention a couple of meetings that are coming up. I don't know if I can just do that at the end of the meeting.
That sounds good to me. And then I was thinking maybe we can touch briefly on the agenda for the next meeting, too. So, do you guys all agree? Okay.
And I'd also like to add, I have something from Dr. Cog with their boomer bond, information on that. So if at the very end, if I could mention more information on it.
Okay, sounds good. So with that, we have our first agenda item is the City Council's goal-setting process. And Glenn, you all received the City Council's proposed council goals and objectives in your packet this week. So I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to talk about this process.
Sorry about that.
Birds in your fingernails?
Victim of the city budget, we couldn't afford 3-in-1 oil.
The noise.
A copy of the proposed council goals and objectives, and they first talked about it at their last university meeting, which was last Tuesday. It was much longer because it had strategies, and those were all taken out. So what I thought I would do, and I've mentioned this in the past, kind of what our process is for ultimately getting to our direction as far as a community development work plan. It's going to follow this process I've kind of laid out behind me here. First being the council formulates the goals and objectives, and this is the latest draft. They're going to discuss it again tomorrow night. And hopefully add to it and take away from it so that it's a pretty good idea of what their high-level goals are and some of the major objectives in order to get there for them. From there, it's going to be, staff's going to be huddling up with the city manager in identifying the strategies of how we see best in the next 2 years we can make a major dent in implementing those goals. And then from there, we have a special meeting with City Council on February 10th. We'll present it to them at that point, and hopefully they ratify it, and it's kind of our direction going forward from there. So I think the fact that we're having this discussion tonight really helps, because then we take your input and we try and fit that in as far as the Planning Commission's priorities into our work plan as well. So I thought I would just talk about that a little bit. Hopefully you're aware that council's been having every Tuesday night, they've been having these council universities, and this is kind of a major part of it, and I think we're at the point of hopefully they're getting close to approving it. And I think as we talk about all the items that Linda has kind of reworked the priority list, they all fit into a category that I can see there. So I think any of these actions kind of will implement the goals of the City Council. And they have actually put on there the detailed item of going through and amending the comp plan altogether, which I think has been, was number 2 on your priority list. So, you know, with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions for you. I think we'll have a couple opportunities for more input on what that work plan is, but that's our direction going forward. So hopefully council gets through it tomorrow night. They have like a 3-hour session on all the legal issues of their position. I think we have somebody who is our risk management person coming in and talking as well. So it's going to be a lot of legal stuff, but hopefully they'll get to their goals and get through it. So I thought we'd just start out with that update, but we can certainly move into the priorities.
Well,
Glenn, can you talk a little bit more about how then our goals fit into your plan as well, or how that all becomes integrated?
Well, where I think most of what the Planning Commission, their responsibilities fall, I see it fitting into number 3, provide adequate development and maintenance of public infrastructure, and that first objective there of providing for maintaining a high-quality built environment. Certainly a lot of the actions or the recommended actions from the downtown neighborhood plan, I think, fits into there. And then if you go to the next page, under number 4, preserve and cultivate a high-quality community. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 5 is update the 1981 comprehensive plan. The next one is evaluate ways to maintain Littleton as a community in which families wish to live, which also I think will be part of the comp plan. Initiate a comprehensive review of city's development and zoning codes to ensure ability to implement community goals. That was written really because of all those items in the downtown neighborhood plan that talked about reviewing the existing codes, how do we make the processes make more sense, and quite frankly, that's, in my mind, in the next year, I see that really as our direction going forward. Ultimately, hopefully, if the council adopts the downtown plan, we did have kind of those actions in there. And so what we're really looking at in the next year is trying to knock as many of those off. So they kind of fit, I think, under those 3 or 4 objectives.
Okay, thank you.
And one thing I was thinking is this document could be used as a foundation for our overall comprehensive plan too. So we can take components of this and incorporate it into the overall plan. So, any comments on these goals and objectives? Jenny?
I think going through it, I was just very encouraged. I think there's a lot of great goals and objectives in here.
And I was also encouraged in that they obviously took in some of the discussions from the downtown area plan, and they became objectives in here. And actually, as I go through here, I see relevant objectives that are relevant to the comp plan and Planning Commission's role in just about every one of these goals. So.
And the sustainability goals are in there. Way to go.
Dave?
As I have a family, this is not a prejudicial statement, but I'd like to think that the city's also going to consider that there's a certain portion of the community that are residents that do not represent families. So a little too much emphasis on family-friendly to the exclusion of singles. I looked through the Littleton 2030 plan thinking that with all the research they had done something to identify, single adults, households, that sort of thing. Nah. So I have no idea what our percentage is, but I think leaning too heavily toward family-friendly, forgetting that especially with light rail access, there is something to be said for offering housing opportunities, job opportunities, entertainment, recreational opportunities for other than families shouldn't be lost sight of. How many dangling participles did I leave in there? About 3? Anyway, that's the only comment I had.
But that fits right in with one of our, one thing we discussed at our last meeting, which is to add the demographics and statistics to the plan. So we can make sure to address that. Any other comments? Jenny?
I like the families being included as part of it, and I guess I see when stating of families, I look at the full spectrum, I guess, and that's a different definition, but looking at our youngest residents all the way to our oldest residents, and in between too. So it's kind of more of a broad spectrum definition, maybe more so than specifically looking at the single demographic piece. So,
As long as we keep it that way.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Dave, too, and I certainly have a family, but they're a grown-up family, and they have different amenity needs than younger children, so.
Be all inclusive. Any other comments? Are we ready to move on to our second agenda item? And this is the Planning Commission's ranking of priorities. This is a document that it's going to be displayed on the screen, and this is just my attempt of taking everything that we ranked as a commission, and I tried to come up with a process that puts everything into a category, and it also, I tried to make everything logical, as what do we need to do first before we can do the 1981 comp plan? What are some of the issues that we have? How do we address the neighborhood plan? So what I have here is we've got in this document here, we have the tasks, and then I put in the Planning Commission priority, the average ranking, and the initial number that follows Dennis's worksheet here. So I just put it in just for your reference. So if you wanted to go back to the spreadsheet, you could go back to the spreadsheet. So I tried logically to put this together, and I separated it into two sections. One is the updating of the 1981 comp plan, and the second one is some of the issues that we need to address. And part of the updating the 1981 comp plan is to set the process, to clarify the comp plan with the city council, identify the issues that we have citywide, create an overall template, and also create the standardized process for public outreach, and then to also create a process for the neighborhood plans and also the neighborhood plan development. And so the issues to address, the way that they're listed on this paper is by the average ranking that we gave them as a commission. So that includes the parking, the PDO process, the TIS, the height, the joint priorities with city council, which is different than the clarifying the comp plan with the city council, and then the downtown implementation plan and signage. So this is an attempt to organize it, and maybe we could use this to move forward, to actually tonight to review this and to kind of get some comments and to see if it's functional. And we would have this in front of us every week to be able to identify the tasks we need to accomplish so we can move forward in the comp plan development process, and also to get clarification from city council. So I know that you just got this tonight, and I apologize for not getting it to you earlier, just finished it up pretty much this morning. So any comments that you see or any, yeah.
Linda,
Karina?
just clarification on the average ranking. So the lower the number, the higher the priority, or the other way around?
The other way around. The higher the number. For example, the two big priorities were South Santa Fe Corridor and the 1981 comp plan. And you can't really see the average ranking there. It's in the light green. But those were the two biggest priorities.
And what's intended by the initial number?
That just corresponds to Dennis's spreadsheet here. And it's the number that at our last meeting, it's the way that we talked about the issue. So the first issue that we yelled out, we wrote down, and that would be the first issue on the spreadsheet.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the list that Dennis had emailed around to us, just put in a different order. So it's the same categories that are on there.
And again, my intention was to try to come up with a logical process. So despite the fact that we did the rankings, we just wanted to, we have to do certain things to get to the neighborhood plans first. We have to, we first of all need to clarify with the city council what our process is going to be. So it was my attempt at putting everything down on paper so that, when we look at this, so development approach to complete the comp plan, well, that's one thing we might be able to address today. We can direct staff to say, hey, we want a meeting with city council to review the process, and we can start getting that rolling today. And then decide what other things we need to address today. So, Steve? What do you, Jenny? Sorry.
Actually, this fits pretty closely to what I was thinking. It's nicely organized because I was thinking there are really two categories where comp plan and our to-do list. And it was interesting because that's exactly how you had separated out these two categories. And so one of the things that was in my mind was just looking at our study session and our meeting was like what percentage of our meeting would we want to focus on doing the comp plan versus our to-do list of items that we know are ongoing, that aren't going away, but at the same time not losing sight of continuing with the comp plan and keeping that continuity that we started with the downtown neighborhood plan. So that's just something I wanted to throw out there of just looking at moving forward, and as well as with staff too, just how, what percentage of our time would we be looking at these areas, these two areas?
Well, in the comp plan, we haven't really, Dennis and I have kind of put together a couple of different scenarios. One would be kind of a low impact is how I would call it. One would be a higher impact. So, and not really knowing, what council's going to say, how to go forward. And the reason I have low and high is really, I think the most important are those overarching goals from the comp plan. And then we have a lot of different neighborhood districts. Some of them are very similar to the other ones as far as the recommendations. So do we look at collapsing a portion of the plan and then just hitting some of the major corridors like the Santa Fe corridor? There's a different way of approaching it. So if it's more of a high impact, what I would like to do is kind of wait till we get through the next budget year so we can budget additional resources for a process like that. And then in the meantime, hit really parking. We talked about kind of a phase one parking approach for downtown and analyzing it. And then some of these code items that are 3.875, 3.75, that sort of thing. So just right today, which is very early in the process, that's kind of how I see the process happening. But it doesn't mean we can't do anything on the comp plan. I think we have some great ideas as far as setting kind of what that framework might look like. How do we communicate with council? How do we solve some of those issues between now and when we actually kick it off? That's my initial thought today.
Craig?
Yeah, it seems to me that the next step would be to take those goals and strategies that come out of the council work sessions and add another column onto the end of this and try to identify those that are consistent with updates to the comp plan, issues to address, and it might add a few to the list, but then we'll have, I think, a more complete work plan that, again, we can use not only for this year, probably for the next couple of years as something to keep in front of us.
No, I would agree. And in fact, even on the code amendments, we're kind of doing that right now with staff, and we're putting in a category of, well, where have we gotten direction? And the downtown plan is one of those areas where, assuming council adopts it, that these are important things, and it's some of these same items here. So, yeah, I think you're spot on there.
Well, and for me, I think there's an opportunity to do both like say, for example, the South Santa Fe corridor, to begin the process of working on that, doing a inventory of the properties, and like maybe begin with a template. So maybe we can use, assign a percentage at the end of every meeting to say, okay, next meeting we're going to spend 50% of our time on the South Santa Fe corridor and 50% on the template. So we can set those agendas at previous meetings. So.
Can I, coming back to your comment of low impact versus high impact, that's impact on your organization and level of effort?
Staff and
Okay.
budget, yeah.
And the budgets are June, what is it? When?
We do calendar year.
We do calendar year. We typically start late spring with the process, and then by early fall, they're completing it, and then they'll tinker with it kind of late fall.
So does that mean, sorry, let me go back. So when you said there's two scenarios you've laid out, one's low impact, one's high impact, what is it that's going to conclude for you or give you a decision of which approach you would take to the comp plan?
I think it's, I think a lot of work has been done on the comp plan. And I think what's most important is the outreach to the citizens and get as much buy-in as we can. So I guess the question is, does staff try and do that? Or do we bring somebody in or a tool like we're talking about Wednesday and have that involved in that type of process? That's basically it. It's really the reason for the budget is if we need to contract additional help. That's why we kind of would rely on the budget to do that.
And to me, when we go through this list and maybe create the template, we'll have a much better idea of the kind of resources we'll need to be able to finish the plan. So by the time that you go into the budget, we might have, a template for the overall plan. We might have identified how we want to approach the public outreach. So
Well,
it could be...
Right, Commissioner, you mentioned the inventory, and that's typically a first step, and there's no reason why we can't start feeding you trends and data that we're seeing in the community since 1981, as the community could change within that period of time. Yes, so we could have a pretty good fact sheet on the community and kind of a direction and a process ready to go, and perhaps we'll do it with staff. It's hard to tell right now.
Are there any guidance, any best practices around, updating comp plan? Is there something that we can just borrow that's already been done as far as a template or something else?
I'm sure there is. Yeah.
Right?
I imagine, Dennis, you've been involved in a lot of Colorado communities. I think we could probably...
Yeah, there's some guidance that's given, from the state in terms of what we should have in it. And then we look around, and what they did, Planning Commission did probably 8 years ago, I guess, so they went and looked at other communities and said, what do we see out there that we like? So they looked at Parker and Englewood and Golden and Arvada and said, what have they done that we think is creative and is appropriate for us? So that's certainly something we could do as well in terms of looking at those templates. Every community really does their own to some degree because you kind of adjust to what you see as your issues, what are your priorities, and so you try and accommodate, what's the culture of the community as well in terms of, is it a community that has a lot of citizen participation in it, is it a community that does not? So they really vary, and it depends on the scale of the community as well as just what the culture is.
I would hope that we can at least start from something as opposed to starting from nothing. I think that'll make the process go a lot quicker, and I think it'll be easier for us to identify what is relevant or the same for our community versus not, and maybe, mix a couple of them together and formulate our own.
Absolutely, and it's one of those things that evolves pretty quickly. One of the things you want to see what is the most recent concept out there, because despite the fact that they all kind of follow the same format. You do the issue identification, you develop your issues and your goals, and then you do your policies and how do we actually implement this stuff. Then they actually do have fairly creative solutions for each community. So you really want to look around and see what's out there. So you're absolutely correct.
And it might be something that we can start the discussion and have the discussion over several meetings, or, we might find something that we really like, and we'll rely on staff to direct us to where we need to look at for the latest and greatest in terms of templates for comprehensive plans. And it's also dynamic. It's not to say that we agree on this template and we don't modify it at a later time, because there might be something else that comes in. So what do you guys think? No.
Our next planning, our next planning commission is the 23rd. Is that right? 2 weeks from tonight?
Correct.
So we may be able to, at that point, I think we can kind of lay out, Dennis and I can kind of give you a good idea of low versus high impact processes and at least start at that point on the 23rd.
So when you say lower high impact processes, what do you mean? Is it?
Well, I think mainly, do we do it in-house or do we get some help?
For the citizen feedback, you're saying mostly.
Or the data collection or the analysis, you can do it different ways, yeah.
Dave?
As a planner for 35 years, I'm a little disturbed at the idea of putting the cart so far before the horse. Picking a template before you've identified the goals. Picking the tools before you've identified the process.
On this spreadsheet, issue identification is before creating the template. So we have it listed beforehand, so then, once we work through some of the issues, then...
Does anybody here actually think we're going to sit down up front by ourselves and identify the city issues or any of the issues by ourselves before we do anything else, rather than make this a reiterative process? Before we hire a consultant to come in and do research, turn up data, we have to identify what it is we're trying to find out. We can't do that cold from the start. So I was disturbed from the beginning on this process. I thought we were mixing apples and oranges. I don't think we were clear on what we were trying to do with the 27 items that we said at the last meeting were going to get pared down to similar items, so we weren't shotgunning it. If you ask a group of people to rank from 1 to 10, 27 items, you're going to get no validity in the results because the numbers are all over the place. You can't even identify a standard deviation to determine how valid the results are. As a result, we have things like adding sustainability ranked higher than identifying neighborhood characteristics or defining neighborhood boundaries. I don't know how we go about that. I just don't see any.
That was the purpose of creating the spreadsheet, so that we can see some of the priorities, but we also try to take a logical approach to the development of
The logical approach, but then the first question I ask, you revert to, oh, well, this is ranked higher than another. What I'm telling you is the ranking process we used has virtually no validity. If you have 3 or 4 people putting numbers by one item and 2 or 3 people putting items by another item, you have no validity in the results. We had one item where nearly everybody put a ranking, and that was the South Santa Fe corridor. So we can say with some confidence that that is a highly valued activity or goal for the Planning Commission for the next year. But I think the process needs to be thought through. The idea of picking templates before we've even identified what makes a neighborhood or how people think, what people think of when they think of neighborhood is illogical.
Well, and that was part of the intention of this, is just to lay out exactly what can be done, and maybe we need to move the process for the neighborhood plan underneath the process, and we can start addressing these issues one by one, and so that we create the template last. When we know the issues that we...
Can I ask a general question about the list, the items that we prioritized? Are we saying that one of these is more important than another as you go down the numbers?
No.
Are we saying that one needs to come before and get resolved before another?
Right. I mean, it's almost like a plan. We want to develop a plan where we can logically go through this. And yes, we identify Santa Fe as South Santa Fe corridor as our #1 priority, but there has to be a logical process in which we can do this. We can't even do the South Santa Fe corridor unless we go through the process to identify, we need to go through that inventory. We need to identify the neighborhood characteristics and develop a standardized template. So there's things that we need to do beforehand.
And we can't do much of anything until City Council tells us, A, what the disposition of the downtown plan is going to be, and B, discuss with us what the roles, responsibilities, process is, what's important to them. That isn't something that we can schedule in down the road. We need to have that up front, or we're wasting our time.
Well, and I think we could develop the approach to complete the comp plan. I mean, we can start with our own approach, because City Council is not going to tell us how we need to approach this. We could develop our approach, and then we can figure out a way to organize and streamline the process. We'll have to do that anyways. We don't have to wait for City Council to set those priorities, because it's got to be done.
That's what we did 3.5 years ago, and look where it left us. We begged them 3 breakfasts, 3 years in a row, to give us some feedback on, are we going about this the right way? Are we missing something? Here's what we think, but what's important to you? And all we ever got was, bring us something we can do a 4-3 vote on. If we go through that again, we're going to be spinning our wheels just as badly the next steps as we have been for 3.5 years.
And that's why one of the next items is clarify the comp plan process with the city council. If we talk to the city council with this, we'll hopefully have an agreement in writing of this is what we're going to do, and we can send a memo out to them to say, here's what we heard, is this right? And I think it's very important to get that agreement, but to get the agreement, we need to come up with, well, what do we think our approach is to finish the comp plan? I mean, I think we should have a good idea of that before we go to city council.
So I want to come back to the comment of template. So actually what Dave helped clarify the intent of the template. I was thinking when I was using the word template that it was a template that helped us to define the process. So thanks for that clarification, Dave, because as I'm understanding it now, it's really then how do you start writing, building the comp plan and revising it. So coming back to our goal or what we're trying to accomplish, which these are, to me, as you've laid out, Linda, all of the tasks in order to complete a comp plan or update a comp plan. So I do like the logical order of that, but it comes back, and I think what you're trying to suggest here, and I do support, is our goal is to update the comp plan. That is one of the objectives of City Council. So at least we're aligned that is a goal of all of us collectively. And as I'm interpreting this, and please correct me if my interpretation is correct, is the first thing we're defining is what is the process of updating a comp plan. And that's actually what I was asking of examples. You know, cities, municipalities do this all the time. Can we leverage existing processes that others have done to help us to formulate how we want to go about doing this? From that, again, seeking that approval, so being absolutely certain that City Council wants us to take this approach in updating it. And then from there, obviously, we have to identify the issues, as Dave said, to know what we're trying to solve for. So I do agree that your logic here, or the steps, make absolute sense in a plan.
The other thing I think you're going to find is as we look at other communities, you'll see other processes that other communities use. And you may want to say, not only that, is that a format we want, but that's also a process. And that includes roles for different players.
Right.
Planning Commission, City Council, a lot of communities, the City Council and Planning Commission have a more equal role in the plan, whereas staff and consultants will take the direction and the policy direction from City Council and from Planning Commission, do the issue identification, do the data collection, do the drafting, bring it back for checking on a regular basis in parallel form between City Council and Planning Commission, so you don't get this great disconnect that we ended up with, but you actually have a more balanced view in terms of are we on board for that. That's something you might want to think about and might want to present to City Council as an option too. So.
Because this priority here of which step, et cetera, it's almost irrelevant because you need all of these steps in order to accomplish the comp plan. Mm-hmm. So as far as priorities, it's update the comp plan. I think we can debate if the neighborhood plan development is almost its separate section, and then the issues down below.
The neighborhood plans are the comp plan.
Right,
They're
right.
not separate. They are the comp plan.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
However, whether we follow the 1981 format or develop a different format, either borrowing from an adjacent community or come up with one of our own, once we've started getting the public feedback, here what the issues are, one way or another, the comp plan is the neighborhood or small area plans.
And I would say that that's an option for you. It's not a necessarily given. When you look at other plans other communities have done, I think one of the things they're going to do is they're going to say, how do we use our comp plan? What are the primary issues in the community? If the primary issues aren't neighborhood-based issues, if you don't have a lot of conflict, don't have a lot of change going on, a lot of questions that you're dealing with as City Council or Planning Commission in terms of what's happening in our neighborhoods, and we're fortunate in Littleton in terms of having zoning, which is pretty consistent with the existing character and the desired character, so you don't get this great disconnect. We see in a lot of other communities where they're going through major change and they've got to really have a plan that gives them direction for that. Where we have issues, maybe other places, our corridors, for example, our commercial places. So you may want to rethink the way it was done in 1981 and say, kind of like what Glenn was saying, is maybe we have a lot more consistency, and we can really consolidate what we're saying about neighborhoods, with some exceptions in terms of here's some small areas that need some attention, and then really focus on the areas where you think you're going to see the issues and the challenges coming for you.
And Dave, I see the issue identification to identify citywide issues, and also the neighborhood characteristics and neighborhood boundaries. Maybe we'll have that conversation on the same night, so that we have a listing of all of our issues, we kind of understand what they are. And
We're not going to have either of those discussions on a single night. First of all, identifying city-wide issues is going to be an ongoing process, as it was with the downtown plan. We accumulate those things as we make contact, as we reach out to the public, as we talk to stakeholders, as we go out and compare similar situations in the Front Range area. We are going to accumulate those on an ongoing basis. That is not a given step that we can check off someplace during the process. As for the rest of it, until you've started talking about what constitutes a neighborhood, until we've gotten some kind of common ground with City Council on how we weigh individual identifiable neighborhoods versus corridors, because they're not going to have the same interests. There's going to be some overlap, but there are going to be distinct differences too. Until we go through that as an investigation and discussion, we're wasting our time thinking we're going to sit down on a given night and say, okay, we're going to spend 1 hour and 15 minutes on this tonight. Isn't going to happen.
Well, we can start the process. We can start the discussion, and then we can say this is an ongoing process, keep a list on a website or something so that we have it in front of us. I mean, that could be something we identify as ongoing. Just like, the template's going to be ongoing because it's going to be dynamic. We're going to change it. We're going to, after we hear a lot of the issues, we'll modify it. I mean, we got to start somewhere.
Right, and therefore I'm going to make a modest request.
Okay.
I'd like every commissioner take the map of the city and do two things. First, locate your own home on the map, and then sit down and think about it and outline what you think of as your neighborhood. Everyone sure?
And why are we
Oh,
doing
here we
this?
Well, Dave, see, I think that would go...
Here's why. Until we started realizing that different people think of and look at neighborhoods differently, we're going to start from some ivory tower, remote starting point perspective, trying to define or understand neighborhoods. That's not what City Council directly charged us to do 4 years ago. They said, reach out to the public, unlike the manner in which the Littleton 2030 group did. And what I'm suggesting right now is a simple exercise. Locate your house on the map,
But see,
define
Dave,
what you think of as the neighborhood, so we start to get some understanding of what's involved here.
well, what I'm trying to avoid is that we approach this logically, and then when we get to the neighborhood boundaries, we'll have a discussion of that. We can come prepared to the meeting and identify, we can have tasks as to what we need to do to identify the neighborhood boundaries, so that we've got that logical approach. We know what we're doing week to week, and we know what issues we have to be prepared to
You
address.
can't do this assigning 30 minutes one night and 45 minutes another night and thinking you're going to do it step by step. You have to start thinking about it. We have to start talking to people. We have to start doing research. Yes, we have to work out a process. But until we started thinking about just how involved that process is going to be, trying to take a stab at hardlining a process or a template is a useless exercise. This should take you 2 minutes at most. There you go.
But for what purpose? I mean, that's all subjective, right? And what I think what we're trying...
It depends. It depends on what thinking process you go through as you try and do this. When I did it, I started thinking about what's familiar to me. What do I usually walk to? What, if it changed, would change how I feel about where I live or what I can do or what I do. Everyone is going to have a different process. But think about it so you'll understand how it works for you. Then as we reach out to the surrounding community and start trying to identify what constitutes a neighborhood versus an industrial zone or a corridor, we'll have some idea of the different perspectives that people are going to bring to the discussion.
Can we stick to the plan for the moment and see
I'm
if...
not saying do this now. I'm saying please take it home, locate your house, think about your neighborhood, and bring it back to the next meeting.
I think along the lines of what Karina was suggesting as far as examples, using what's there instead of reinventing the wheel, what I would start with is the existing comp plan. Somebody years ago defined neighborhoods, and that's a place to start. But what makes it interesting is now you've got the community process and going through this exercise or others, identifying how neighborhoods have changed, how people think of their neighborhoods. It could evolve, and it goes into one of these line items where it says re-identify, reassess the neighborhoods.
All three of us are in the planning business. Would it even occur to you if a client came in and started talking about his project and say, oh, we can do it just like this project we did a year and a half ago? No, it wouldn't. You have to ask what they're looking for, what motivates them, what's important to them, what their individual situation is. You don't reach for a template first.
But
You
we're
don't.
not proposing to reach for a template first. We're proposing to follow the plan that we have outlined here.
And David's suggestion is can be a step in the process, and I think that's how I'd like to look at it, is this can be a step that we incorporate into the process, but I think that this, as well as other suggestions, ideas, et cetera, is what we're trying to articulate as we say, how would we go about defining the process of completing a comp plan? We'd want to gather this information, or we want to go through this exercise, et cetera. So it's not that this is not valuable. I, again, think this, and also, how do we eliminate some of the subjectivity around that by either looking at things done in the past, things done in other areas, or, how do you model neighborhoods, or how do you define it? Is it by demographics? Is it by streets or traffic patterns, et cetera? But I think we have to start articulating a process, otherwise it will become very unruly.
Right. And I think we'll stay focused in every meeting, which I think is also very important. Jenny, sorry.
Also, I was just thinking about our downtown neighborhood plan, and with our update is wanting those two to be seamlessly integrated. So it'd be great if we're talking about certain, I think it's nice to have certain sections that we're focused on. And so if they are tied together with our downtown neighborhood plan, I think it'll be all the stronger. So, and I think looking at our downtown neighborhood plan is also a very good plan to look at as we're moving forward, as having just gone through that process in how we update our citywide comp plan. So
I agree. I mean, I think looking back at the downtown, it's like a mini version of a comp plan, and it was vision, goals. It's not, and I'm not suggesting that this is a template, but if we have a vision of what the city is, that's where we start with, and then it's trying to identify then what is the information that we need in order to help us identify the goals to achieve that vision and kind of foster that way. So again, I think there's resources that we can tap into to start putting an outline together. It doesn't mean that it's not subject to change or mold it as necessary as we've had our discussions, but to start with a blank piece of paper is really difficult.
I think where I struggled with this list is it was a project list, but then we also kind of jumped forward in how we accomplish some of these things. And so there's ways of how to get there in here as well. So it didn't really lend itself to the 1 through 10 ranking. I guess what I take away from it is there's really 4 top things. Santa Fe corridors being number 1, that we deal with parking downtown. And there's some zoning code amendments and the comp plan. So I think Dave hit it. The cart's before the horse now to be talking about how we get to the comp plan, at least until after February 10th. And then we can maybe have a better discussion of how we get there on that particular item. It's just my idea.
Jenny?
I think that could be, getting clear direction from City Council is certainly important. And when we do get into the comp plan, I think it'd be great if we have our comp plan, looking at that next to the downtown neighborhood plan and seeing what things are similar, because there's certain sections that are in our citywide document that are also similar to our sections in our downtown neighborhood plan. And so even starting to look at and pull out those similarities, that could be also a good starting point to start to develop what sections are we looking at citywide. If it'd be better to start with the comp plan and looking at that further after February 10th, then that could make sense. But I think if whatever topic we're going into, if we can prepare ourselves to come to the meeting, if that's going to be if February 10th or whatever date it is, that if we're going to look at what our going through the approach, the comp plan, how do we organize it, how do we streamline it, that we bring the material to the table that will help us make those decisions. Whether it's, first having our downtown neighborhood plan, our 1981 comprehensive plan in front of us, and then maybe we've even had some time to get our heads into some of the other comp plans in other cities. And so we can come to the table with some good ideas on moving it forward.
Is that to develop the approach?
Yes, to develop the approach.
Steve?
What was actually the reason we did these rankings? This is along the lines of where Dave is at, and I'm kind of baffled by why we did the rankings.
I just think we wanted to see how the priorities shook out with all the commissioners. So we wanted to see, where does parking come into play? Where does Santa Fe corridor? Where does?
Dave, hold on. So are we using these rankings, or did we just do it?
No.
So
The way the plan is, the way this is organized, it doesn't use the rankings. It uses what makes sense with the exception of the issues to address, and then I just organized it by rankings.
Okay.
That's what's confusing, and I guess I read it as, here's a list of projects that the planning commissioners threw out that we think is going to be important for the future of the community. And then we gave 10 points to the highest, I believe, right, and on down.
My point was, it was apples to oranges to begin with. Okay? In the first place, you don't prioritize using demographics and statistics. That's a given. You use it where it's appropriate. You don't factor it in at stage 17 or month 13 of the process.
But we had to put it in here to be able to
But we weren't
keep it in
clear
front
on
of
what we were
us.
trying to do, Linda. We were mixing goals and priorities and steps in the process all together and saying, make sense of it. And we couldn't.
But this is the attempt to make sense out of it, not
What I'm
necessarily the
telling you is the
rankings,
attempt
but
failed.
projects.
The attempt failed miserably.
So how do you propose moving forward?
Yeah, how do you propose doing it? I mean, it's an effort to set priorities.
The first thing is we have to
focus.
identify what we need from city council in the way of clear direction so we don't sit here 2 years from now twiddling our thumbs, watching them take exception to 90% of what we've done because they would never give us clear direction on what they were going to find acceptable. If we fail to do that up front, we're dooming ourselves to at least another year of futility.
Well, and this proposes doing this up front.
So does,
So let's identify what we need to get from city council.
so Dave, is this the document that we need to get?
No.
What is it that we need to get?
That's a vision statement. Everybody know what a vision statement is? It makes everybody feel good up front, and then they can move on
No, so
and get down to work.
I'm going beyond the vision statement here. I'm going to some of the specific objectives that were called out. Is this the document that at least from city council is saying, here is the objective that we're trying to achieve in our city?
No, because that's not what the planning commission has been charged to doing. That's what city council sees as the overall vision and goals for the city as a whole. Planning commission basically has, I don't know, stop me when I go too far off the deep end. 3 tasks, 3 main charges in front of it. Number 1, we have been told to update the city's comprehensive plan. That's a given, and it's on the list. No argument. The only question now is, what are they going to want us to do, want us not to do? Where are they going to step in, either beforehand and tell us don't go there, or afterwards saying you wasted your time? We need to get that up front. Number 2, we have applications, we have PDOs, we have ordinance changes that we will consider on a weekly basis. Okay, we can't predict how those are going to come. That is the normal business of the Planning Commission. Number 3, which really ties in, unites those first 2 goals, is saying, okay, as we go through either of those processes, we are going to, as we already have for the last 3.5 years, encounter areas that look like they're in conflict, they're unclear, they create problems that the city ostensibly wants to avoid, whether it's economic development, diversity of housing, or appeal to different family types. This third category says we have to take what we've learned from the first 2 processes, comprehensive plan update, dated week-to-week business, and reconcile the conflicts and the differences so that everything makes sense. Does anybody see anything that I've missed in those 3 categories that the Planning Commission is to be doing? Professionally, Glenn?
I'm not sure what's your number 3, the comment.
Was saying what we learned from the comp plan process, comp plan update process, and from the review of applications, ordinance changes, that sort of thing, is we're going to find every now and then conflicts or gaps and that sort of thing, and then our job is to step in, work with staff, go to City Council and say, we see a problem that needs to be addressed.
Well, and I think the whole purpose of the issues to address is to make sure that we do not lose the issues that we've been talking about to bring back to the Planning Commission, issues that have come up during these cases. And if we have one list, we can at least keep it in front of us, and it doesn't need, we can see that on a routine basis.
I guess the 4th function I would see, Dave, is implementation of the plans as you adopt them. And I really think it needs to be a separate function just because it's a major effort if it's not going to get lost. And so,
Is that a Planning Commission responsibility, the implementation?
it's like everything else. It's staff, it's City Council, it's Planning Commission, but Planning Commission certainly in a lot of those cases, if it's zoning, you're going to have to go through and be familiar with it. If it's a lighting ordinance, whatever it is, you're going to have to be familiar, be comfortable with it's achieving what you want it to achieve and adopt it, recommend adoption of it to City Council and whatever the issue is. But yeah,
but
certainly to some degree it is your
That's a normal concluding activity in any of those things.
And I guess I'd say I don't think it's concluding. I would think of it as ongoing rather than concluding, because I think concluding tends to be lost. And in my experience, at least, you have an implementation strategy that doesn't get done because there's a rush to get on to the next planning effort. And so we don't get the kind of implementation that the plan really deserves. And so you don't see the real kind of marker.
I think that's more follow-up than anything else. Basically say, here's what we say we want to do, here's what we think we need to do it, here's who's going to do it, here's how soon it ought to happen or in what sequence it ought to happen, and here's what we ought to look for in terms of resistance or obstacles we hadn't anticipated, and we keep working on it until we get it, until we deliver it. Now, granted, a lot of that's going to depend on staff, which means that's another item that we need to, as a planning commission, to address with City Council up front. What resources is the city the City Council willing to ask staff to commit to, in addition to the bulk of its work? That has to be a consideration. We need to know up front where the City Council's priorities are, so that we don't start going overboard on, well, we think we ought to do a sweeping revision to the zoning ordinance, when City Council is going to say, wait a minute, you come to us with 2 or 3 really thorny problems with some description of what the problem is and recommendations on how to fix it, and we can deal with it, but we're not going to get into a general.
Karina?
So before we do address implementation, because I know that, to David's point, and I think all of us are feeling the, call it the doubt of how are we, if our downtown plan does get approved, how are we going to implement? So I know that we're all struggling with how do we really see this come to life. But before we address that topic, I want to come back to the 3 items that Dave identified. He said, our responsibility is to update the comp plan. Our responsibility is to review applications, approve PDOs, et cetera, and identify issues. So I don't see where the disconnect is, Dave, if we're saying our role as Planning Commission is update the comp plan. I know this isn't final, but if one of the goals of City Council says update the comp plan, and here we've outlined update the comp plan, so I think we're all agreeing we want to update the comp plan. We just don't know how, or we're trying to address how are we going to do that, what are the steps. So I think we are all in agreement of updating the comp plan. What we're trying to solve for here is what is the best process for us to go through in order to do that.
Right.
Yes?
And I don't see that in these items. I certainly don't see any kind of logic, any progression. I don't see any kind of recognition that this is going to be a reiterative process. We're not going to say, there are 12 steps, we're going to check them off one at a time. It isn't going to happen. That's not planning.
So your issue is not about the goal of updating the comp plan, is for you, we are not deliberate or diligent enough to have articulated exactly what this process is.
Right. It isn't a reasoned process, it's an orderly process, and they're not the same thing.
What can we do to get the reasoned process? I mean, is there some changes we can make to a kind of list, or is there, I mean, I hate to make it a free-for-all. If we don't have some kind of tool to manage the process, we're not going to move forward at all. We're going to be in the same situation we were in.
Before you
creating a
reach
plan.
for a tool, you have to know what the job is.
Well, the tool is trying to identify what the job is, so
That's
that
not
we
the
will have
tool
that
that-
discussion.
Why isn't the job updating the comp plan? Why isn't it as simple as that? I'm not getting why we're not.
What do we
we're not
have to do to
answering that.
update the comp plan? What's important?
But
City
she's
council
trying to
told us 4
identify
years
what-
ago. Okay, well, no, she asked
Oh,
the question.
wait,
What do we
let
have to do?
Let Matt talk.
That's what she's trying to identify. She's trying to lay out, we said in our last meeting that we wanted to lay out how we're going to accomplish that. You may not like how this is organized or whatever, it doesn't fit your goals for how you'd organize it, so propose something. Seriously, I mean, at least she took an effort here and tried to organize it into a series of steps to say, here's how we're going to approach it.
She took the
That's all we're
random
trying
mixed
to do
bag
is
of
to say,
27
here's how
items
we're
that
gonna
you
approach
yourself
it.
said 2 weeks ago were overlapping, comparable, should have
Right.
been resolved into something tighter so we could get some meaning out of the list, and she put them together, tried to make sense of them. Okay? The bottom line is, to start the process on comp plan, the first thing we need to make sure of is that we're headed in the same direction as city council.
And
If
that's-
we don't do that up front and have discussion amongst ourselves as what it is we know, we think we need to hear from them, we're only going to be going back and doing it again.
Here's the way I see it. We're going to meet with city council, and they're going to green light us or red light us. They're going to say, your responsibility continues to be handling the comp plan. Okay? Well, when they say it's your responsibility to handle the comp plan, are we just going to go, okay, well, how are we going to do
No, we
that?
need to go
Or
in
are we
with-
going to spend our time now laying it out, saying, here's how we want to handle it? I mean, that's what I think Linda's trying to do. I think that's what Dennis has tried to do, and Linda's trying to make sense of it. I agree with you that with 27 items and lots of overlap, it's difficult to lay it out perfectly. And I'm sure Linda would say, no, this isn't perfect. She's trying to strive for, how do we want to approach this? And I don't think that we need to be so systematic and do one thing at a time. I mean, honestly, while we're waiting for city council to meet with us, we could be putting together some structure and saying, here's how we want to deal with it. So that when city council comes and says, green light, you're up, ready to go, how are we going to deal with it?
So
And
while we're waiting
I,
for city
for one-
council to tell us what card game we were going to play, we're going to start putting the rules together?
Okay, hold on a second. Let's take a consensus of the Planning Commission as to if we want to use this as a template or create another template to kind of move forward with the comp plan process. So all those in favor of using this use this as a foundation to build, and to start building the approach to develop the comp plan and to start our tasks. And knowing that this is going to change, it's dynamic. As a matter of fact, I've got probably about 6 or 7 things to add based on our discussion today. So,
Before we take a vote, can I just add, and we discussed this early in the meeting, that we were going to add a column for the city council priorities to this to keep it in front of us as a way of identifying what the priorities are going through this. And I think that is essential. We need to be on the same page with city council, and I think, at least if I'm hearing it right, Dave, that's what your emphasis
It
is.
isn't their priorities that I worry about. It's what do we believe is essential to starting or continuing the comp plan updating process that is going to need concurrence by city council, based on what we've learned over the last 3.5 years? Are they going to hold us to the neighborhood outline, the 7 purely arbitrary, nothing in common neighborhoods that are in the existing 1981 comp plan? And if they're not going to insist that we stick with that, what direction are they looking for us to take that will differentiate residential neighborhoods from job-producing areas like South Park, from retail corridors like Littleton Boulevard and Broadway?
I don't think
Can
you're
we-
going to get that kind of detail from city council.
No.
1-hour meeting or a 7-hour meeting. You're not going to get that kind of detail. We have to delineate those things. These are what we think the neighborhood boundaries are. But the last city council said, update the current comp plan. They didn't say go make a new comp plan. And when we tried to make a new comp plan, they threw that back and said, no, we want you to update the current comp plan.
Well, and wait, can we talk about the city council meeting right after we decide on this? And maybe talk about what components we need to talk to them about?
Before we vote, I think, the rankings don't mean anything. They're too far
Right.
out. We need to throw these rankings off of here, get rid of them because they just don't mean anything.
And I would
We've
like
got
to
one that's high and the rest of them are below 300. So it's meaningless, I think, to have the rankings on here. I think it's a starting point. This is a place to start that we can start to bring together some ideas on how we're going to get there. I think we have to have a process, and I think templates, I don't know that everybody understands, has the same definition for a template. And that's where we need to decide what is a template, what is the process. To me, the template, I was looking at the downtown plan. We have a template that we use. We have a structure that we put it together. Is that what everybody thinks template is? I don't know. I think we need to understand what all the definitions of what we're doing here. But this is a starting point, Dave. We have to start somewhere. We've been going around for an hour and haven't moved forward one step. So we need to move forward. I would suggest that we remove the rankings, use these priorities, and then put them together and maybe in a different fashion.
And add the column on city council priorities.
City council, but really, we need to know what city council wants us to do. They want, that past city council said, update the current comp plan. They didn't say start a new comp plan, build something new. Obviously, we're going to have to change some of the neighborhoods. They just don't work anymore. But is that what they want us to do until we get to that point? But before then, we have to have something that we're going to take to them and say, this is where we're thinking, because they're not going to be able to, in 15, 20 minutes or 14 hours, tell us what it is they want us to do.
Absolutely agree. But before we can go and tell them what we're thinking, we have to think about it. And we aren't going to think about it in 15 or 30-minute increments in a given meeting. Maybe it's just me.
Can we
but-
finish the
Okay,
spreadsheet?
maybe it's just
and
me.
move forward
I
from
want to
there?
point something out. This process is not confined to the meetings. If everybody's coming into these meetings saying, we're going to work on this from 7 to 9 and then not think about it for 2 weeks, we're the wrong people for this job.
Well, and we're not
We're the
saying we
wrong
can do
people for
that.
this job.
I mean, we're not saying we're going to do that. We just need to schedule something in so that we can make sure that we get accomplishments. We can certainly readdress an issue, and if somebody wants to think about something, we could say, why don't we spend 10 minutes at our next meeting addressing these issues? So, I mean, we've got the flexibility to be able to do those kinds of things. We're not saying that we have to just make a decision on the spot.
Then why don't we start thinking about, for the next meeting, let's sort out what are things that are going to be ongoing. Okay, incorporating demographics and statistics is not a specific task. It is a part of the approach. Okay? Identifying citywide issues is not going to be something that we do at a given week and it's done. It's going to be cumulative. And we're going to reiterate and refresh that list as we go, as we did during the downtown small area plan. Let's differentiate between those items that we can ask the right questions and get some help in doing research on, versus the ones where we need to reach out to the public, either as a community as a whole or in small areas, and get feedback. What's important to them? What's critical? Somebody said something earlier about thinking about the neighborhoods, we have to remove the subjectivity. First mistake. The first element, the strongest element of a neighborhood is, in fact, subjectivity. How people feel about what people think of as their neighborhood. If you try and set that aside or try and regulate it or hardline it, we're missing the boat right off from the first step.
Well, can we first agree on the spreadsheet as we talked about? I mean, how many people agree to use this as a foundation?
Are we
And
getting rid of the rankings?
getting rid of the rankings and adding a column on city council priorities and We'll build on that.
Is the city council priority list going to coincide with this any place but on update the 1991 or 1981 comp plan?
Yes, they'll see more specific on February 10th.
Okay, remains to be
And
seen.
it's something that Commissioner Samuelson said. The scale of it is kind of what I was talking about, low, high impact. And yes, we are going to be looking at.
So they'll start picking up things like, they'll start picking up things like the PDO process and the TIS definition.
Everything.
Okay.
All the 4 things that you mentioned, or 3 things.
I'm getting rid of these columns as we speak. So can we have like a consensus to, does everybody agree that, or is there another type of management tool we should try to develop to be able to manage the process?
Linda, I think you really, staff got what we think is what your primary projects that you'd like to see go forward for the next year. I think a lot of the other things are, like you said, it's a way of getting there with the comp plan. So I don't know that we need to remove the categories at this point in the numbers.
I just did it anyways.
And also, I think as far as next meeting, I would have to say it'd have to be after February 10th, that we really come up with a plan of how to get there.
Well, can we talk
But
about this?
that's only a month away. I mean, it's not that far away.
I just think if we lose some time, so do we want to agree that this is the spreadsheet to use? So all those in favor of using this as a foundation, we can modify it and do whatever we need to? And that is everyone except Dave. And so should we now talk about what we want to do? So should we direct staff to get on city council schedule as soon as possible, after their goal-setting meeting, so that we can clarify?
Can I ask a question of you, Glenn?
Sure.
What do you think it's more important to do? Do you think it's more important that we wait for city council to define their vision of what the planning commission's responsibilities and priorities are? Or do you think it's a good approach for us to say, okay, I mean, we have very experienced planning commission people here, to say, come with a proposal and say, this is how we think we should move on? I mean, personally, I would prefer the second. Like, we have very experienced people who have been on the planning commission for a long time, and beyond that, they've, don't take this personally, I'm just going to say it, they've seen maybe the way not to do it, right? Because it took 4 years.
Several ways not to do it, actually.
Yeah. So do we want to look at this and say, here's our proposal for where we're going, or do we, I mean, I guess I look at my daily life, I'd rather like lead the way and say, this is how we think we should go. You know what I mean? But what's your opinion of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, typically when staff goes to council, we go with a solution. We don't necessarily say, well, here's a big problem. What do you think? And so I would have to agree with you. If we get a meeting, and I absolutely agree with you, I think that's where we probably broke, is we kind of went a different direction from council, not anybody's particular fault. It turned into a 4-year process, and it was impossible to keep the two together, I think, through that period of time. But when we do set that time of how we get it together, yes, I think the Planning Commission comes forward and says, this is how we think it ought to happen.
I have another question. Are we going to do a workshop this year, Dennis, or you guys put it?
We've just started talking about it a little bit in terms of what the issues might be, but
With
I don't.
a Planning Commission workshop
Right.
with staff.
Done that in the past on a Saturday, taking most of the Saturday
Yeah.
to work through this.
Should be a good
We have
subject.
to wait if there's any changeover in Planning Commission.
Yeah, in the past, that's been at least one major goal of that workshop session, was to bring any newbies up to speed on Planning Commission's role, zoning versus comprehensive plan, that sort of thing, so they get their feet under them as early as possible.
That's typically in March? When does it?
Usually April, May. Typically, we do the first week in May we've been doing, kind of, just because we've got new members on board, they've had a chance to kind of get their feet a little bit wet anyway. So.
Last year, we tried to get too politically correct and had to make sure that everybody could make it to it, instead of, if one person wasn't going to be able to make it for one reason or another, so we ended up splitting it into 2 different nights through the week instead of having one Saturday.
There were some other conflicts, too. I think we were getting a new community development director about that same time. Sort of threw a monkey wrench into the process.
Is everybody here intending to continue on in the Planning Commission? That's good.
I don't know why.
Huh?
That's still up to city council to decide.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, at least you've said I've expressed interest in continuing on.
And I haven't committed.
But going back to your point, Matt, I think it's a good one, whether we come up with an approach that we present to council or whether they come to us. And I don't think it's either or. I think there's a combination where we've started to identify our priorities here. And actually, I don't really have too much difficulty myself with the way these rankings are identified, even though they don't make a heck of a lot of sense and they're apples and oranges. But at least because of the way the process works here and the difficulty it is to get a consensus on what these issues are, we've kind of done a brain dump and then gone through staff to prioritize them. We at least have some idea of what the other commissioners are thinking, so we can move forward with priorities to a certain extent. But at the same time, City Council, they're directing the operations of the city, so if there are priorities that are not consistent with what we think, we need to weigh those and identify those, and that's why I think that additional column here helps. And then maybe we look at it in a work session and say, well, we need to completely reprioritize these, or identify new issues that aren't on here, or throw out some of the ones that are oranges so that we have all apples. So I think this is a good beginning, and thanks to Linda for trying to organize this, and thanks to David for organizing it through emails as well. I mean, I think you made some sense the way you consolidated them, and unfortunately that didn't all come together. But
No, I feel a lot like Don Quixote at this point.
It's all good information. We have one more meeting before their February 10th, right? We could have that meeting.
It's 23rd.
We're not planning on not having a meeting, are we?
Is the 23rd, is the 10th the city council workshop?
Yes.
So then,
What I'd like to see us be able to do is take these and maybe any other items and put together a priority list of 4 or 5 items that we would go to city council with and say, this is the way we would like to proceed, so that they can see what we're thinking. As you've got 2 or 3 new city council people that may not be up to speed on everything that we're doing here, and it's better if we go in with saying, this is what we would like to do. Want to update the comp plan, parking, whatever those items are, go to from comp plan to parking to the Santa Fe corridor, and this is how we want to proceed to make it simpler for them.
And there's the key, not just a list, not just a numbered list or anything, but a thumbnail sketch of, and here's how we think we need to proceed, which would also identify things, whether it's going to be a high load, low load as far as staff input, staff resources, or outside resources, just a very succinct description
Paragraph, it's simple,
right,
very simple.
of how we propose to go about this. I think that's going to tell them more, and it'll help us organize ourselves more than trying to prioritize anything or worrying about individual little steps. Let's get the general approach down first, and then we can flesh it out.
so can we get on the schedule with city council after the 10th as soon as possible?
We'll try and do that, but I can't guarantee you anything.
In the meantime, we have it. Are we still going to have that revisitation of the building painting over on Bellevue that got postponed from December? That's still scheduled for the 23rd.
That's actually something we're working on, and they're back on the table, and they may basically comply. So that could not be on your agenda.
So at the moment, we don't know that we have any technical business in front of us?
Right.
Okay.
That would be the only thing at this point for the 23rd.
So,
And as I mentioned, one thing is I am including your priorities as staff puts together what we think the work plan ought to be. So to get to your point, Kurt, yes, we're doing that. We're using these numbers. And not only that, we have your downtown neighborhood plan that also identifies high priorities, medium priorities, that sort of thing. So we've got that direction, I think.
There was,
Sorry.
oh, go ahead.
All right. One of the things I think will be helpful too, and I hope for us having a work plan as well, so that we know that coming in the next meeting, our priority is, let's say we're going to address parking for downtown, and we're going to, so that there's an item that we're going to be looking at or preparing for, coming to the table, we know we're going to be making some decisions, setting directions, and so that we can have a clear start to set a path and start to implement some of these items. So I think it'll be good as we move forward to each meeting, if there isn't anything on the public hearing, that we know this is what we're going to focus on, and the next step, and the next step, and knowing that we've got a number of items on our agenda, and we've got to use our time in a timely fashion to make implementation type of decisions, so that we can focus on that and then move to the next item, because I know we've got kind of a backlog of some issues to address, and so and fit that in with the comp plan, so that so having each meeting having a somewhat of an objective of how we're going to like an outcome, and if we need to do research in advance, that we can do that, come to the table prepared, so that we can make good decisions.
Or at the
Wait,
very
Kurt.
least, know what we have to do to keep things moving
Yes,
along.
yes.
Not necessarily make a decision, but keep things moving along so we can reach a decision.
And
Okay.
actually,
Sorry.
one of the things, just in working in the downtown neighborhood plan, I thought was great, is when we took a section, when we identified and said, we're going to look at these sections, we broke out in groups of 2, we did research, we came back to the table, and it seemed like that kind of way to move about the comp plan when we update or even an issue of parking, and either we're looking at a certain area or we've got identified tasks if we individually are looking at it or grouped together, but that we're coming to the table and we're sharing something, we're discussing it, making decisions, and it seems like that started to really build the momentum, at least with the downtown neighborhood plan. And if we could do the same thing with the comp plan, as well as our to-do list, to have that same momentum, I think will be helpful.
Craig.
So I have 2 items now, because just to follow up on what Jen said, I think what I heard was that perhaps we should have a standing agenda item for each meeting to talk about the next meeting agenda, and get that continuation item on the agenda, whether it be a continuation or the next thing that we need to tackle.
An action item list.
So that we can do our homework. Like you said, it doesn't all occur during this 2 hours, that we come in prepared to tackle that issue at the meeting and get it done.
And make decisions.
And let's keep something in mind. I understand what you're saying about the 2-person process. The one place it fell down is we did that after the public outreach, and then we had no more public input or interchange until we had the hearings. Okay, we took the little bit we got from the survey and the open house and the meetings with stakeholders, and then we went off and did our thing. And we didn't do any touching base. We didn't do any, hey, we didn't talk with them about that. Maybe we ought to go back. Let's think about how we work that into the process, given that was one of the primary directives we got from the city council 4 years ago, was involving the public.
Well, and that's one of on this task list, is create a standardized process for public outreach. So we can create that format.
I'd be happier seeing flexible process than standardized, but okay.
But, I mean, it is flexible. We could have a standard.
Guideline instead
Yeah.
of a standard process. so that it
Well,
allows for that flexibility.
And I guess what I'd suggest with that, and Glenn and Dennis, I don't know if you guys passed along any of that project plan I submitted, but it was a lot along those lines of having a process, because I think if we're single-threaded and we're all in here doing the same thing and it takes 9 of us to make a decision, then yeah, it's going to take 3 or 4 years to get anything else done, right? So having a process whereby we can go out and represent and have multiple threads going, especially with the comp plan, allows us to complete things quicker. Now, when I suggest multiple threads, what I suggested was a process, for instance, on the public feedback of saying we divide into whatever neighborhood plan we choose, and 2 commissioners and a staff member takes responsibility for getting the feedback for that neighborhood. Relating to the template, I think I was the main person that suggested the template, and let's make sure you understand what I was saying, and that was, Kurt, you mentioned the downtown plan. That's exactly what I'm saying. I think that's a pretty darn good document. I think the city council is going to approve it. I think that even when we had the public outreach and at the end, there really wasn't that much feedback, which represents the fact that you guys listened, you followed through, it was represented in the document. And the only thing I'm saying about the template is that it's just a model, a starting point, so that if we were to divide into separate threads, that each team would have a starting point. That, let's say 75% of the document is going to be common for any neighborhood. It may not come out that way, but honestly, everything that was said in the downtown neighborhood plan about wanting to keep the same character and good building design and good ways for people to move around and nice streets and nice, those things are going to be common to every neighborhood. So that's what I'm saying about a template, is that it's a starting point where you have something that 60 to 75% of it is going to be the same. We can break up into teams, and we could have multiple tasks continuing at once. And I also agree with what you said earlier, Dave, about if you're here and you're only going to be here 2 hours every 2 weeks, it's probably not good enough, because once we get into that, and if we go into multiple threads, people are going to have to commit more time to following through and taking their share of the responsibility. So.
Okay. So, so we're going to get on the schedule to meet with City Council after the 10th. So in between that, now and then, we had talked about, here's the 4 things that we need to proceed. What else do you guys think we need to address, and how should we address City Council? Is that?
When you're saying the 4 things of what we need to proceed, what do you
Oh, the 4 priorities. So my guess is the Santa Fe corridor. Glenn was saying parking. Oh, I think we have to agree on those 4 priorities. So that could be one task. So we can agree on the priorities, but what are some of the other things that we need to do specifically for the City Council? Do we have to say, we agree that we need to finish the 1981 comp plan and we want to approach this?
One of the key things that Dave said we need feedback and direction from City Council. What is it that we can compile or present to them? How do we get that feedback from them? I think that's what we're all waiting for. So is there something that we can do to make sure we get the feedback that we need in a way that's actionable? Is there something we can do on that front as opposed to just, what do you want us to do, right? So what kind of, how do we position that statement to them?
I think, just as all of you have said in different ways, after February 10th, the council says, go forward with a comp plan, you develop a plan of how to get there. And then we sit down together and show them what your plan is and how we're going to do it. And Get them to green light it, red light it. I love that.
But at the same time, we need to make sure that the process that happened with the downtown area plan does not happen again, and that, we get the buy-in from them.
I think that's part of your process of how you do that. That's how you process of how council's going to be involved all the way through.
And how do we want council to be involved all the way through?
We asked council to be involved last time, and one of the councilmen said, it's your plan, you write it, and bring it to us. And basically said that he didn't want to be involved with it at all.
Yeah, we looked for, expected, hoped for, needed discussion, and what we got was, bring us something we can vote on.
It's your plan, you guys make it and bring it to us.
Then if we can get city council to agree that that's what they want to do, then we'll have no feedback mechanism. We'll just provide them a plan, and then they
The
have
person
to
that
be...
said that is not on the council now, or the council that just went through the last hearings in there.
And I think we would have run that risk again, right? With so much turnover in city council, that can happen. You might find yourself in the same situation. So it's almost like we can't take that as an answer, or not accept that as their position to say, okay, develop it and then come back. I think we've learned from that. And even though one particular or a couple of people may want to do that again, I think we've already gotten burnt that way.
The whole process of task assignment or delegation and reporting is the person in authority assigns the task with certain criteria or priorities. The person given the task comes back and says, okay, here's what I'm hearing. This is the way I'm going to approach it. Tell me if that's still consistent with what you were looking for. And then periodically comes back and says, now here's how I've expanded on that. Here's what I've done to do that expansion. Do you see anything that's out of whack with the direction you gave me? And we didn't get that from council. For the last 4 years, we did not get that. We asked for it repeatedly. We never got it. We've got to find a way, working with staff, working with individual council people, to make sure that they are committed to that kind of process, that we live up to our end of it by bringing them back, reporting to them periodically on how we've been going about it and what we're trying to produce and where we are in the process. But if we don't commit to that process up front, sorry, Pat.
No, I thought you were done. I'm sorry.
I'm never done. We know that. Or I am done.
I've been watching a few of the recent council sessions, and they've been talking about liaisons to the commissions. So are they going to have a liaison to the planning commission? I think Valdez talked about being the liaisons.
I think there were some legal issues that the city attorney was going to address because of the quasi-judicial nature, so...
There certainly is precedent in other jurisdictions for having them have a liaison to the comprehensive planning process.
Right.
They can't do the quasi-judicial, but they certainly can do the comprehensive planning process.
Well, I guess what I was driving at, along the lines of what you're saying, is we need the opportunity to provide feedback. Maybe not for the first 6 months, but, at the end of 6 months, we need the opportunity to meet with them and have them provide feedback and say, yeah, you're going in the right direction. And I say 6 months because, none of us are full-time here. I mean, that's just the way it is. So that's why I was asking. I mean, it seems to me if we approach the council and say, here's how we want to proceed, and by the way, we're going to expect from you that you invest in us every 6 months, every 3 months, you come and meet with us, and we have a session regarding the complex.
And we actually did that, and we had extensive discussions with city council, and they agreed with our approach and our direction. And in the end, they kind of reneged on everything that they asked us to do, including what to include and not include in the plan.
I'd rephrase that slightly and say they didn't overtly disagree. I don't remember anything where they ever said, yeah, we agree. Just me.
But Matt, I think what kind of feedback do we want from city council is going to be really important. And then, what is the process for them to be involved? If we have one liaison, that's just one person in the entire city council, and everybody else might have a totally different idea of what the direction should be.
Well, and there are other jurisdictions where it's equally balanced between people who are assigned from city council and people who are assigned from planning commission. So you've got that weight. So you can have more than one. It's not restricted to one. There's no requirement. And again, because it's not quasi-judicial, you can have that participation.
This whole quasi-judicial thing really ties us all in knots. It forces or it induces the focus on making a motion and taking a vote rather than thinking logically, clearly, rationally through the process, asking the right questions, accumulating the information. There's got to be a way to overcome that. And I'm sure every community in the country has been saying that for the last 20 years, but
Okay.
it's crippling, and it is absolutely crippling.
Okay.
So Dennis, I'm curious, what that looks like, that sort of joint process where, say, for argument's sake, it's City Council and Planning Commission going through a comp plan process. Is there then, it's completely separated from the quasi-judicial process, then I assume that there'd be joint work sessions on a regular basis.
There are joint work sessions, absolutely, or individual work sessions. I think it depends on the community. I know Fort Collins, I think, goes separately. Everywhere through the process, they go to City Council and they go to Planning Commission and get the feedback and report back and forth. There are some that do joint, absolutely. They have a technical task force or a legal elected task force or whatever it might be that has representatives from each Planning Commission and City Council. So you get that representation, so you don't have that miscommunication. Hopefully, it's hard to say you're not going to get any at all, but it certainly, I think, helps with that kind of ongoing communication to have that participation.
But it doesn't sound like that was presented as an option in the downtown area plan, that the council said, okay, this Planning Commission, this is yours, you do it.
Yeah, I think that's the way it was presented initially, was that this was going to be Planning Commission. And it's unusual for Planning Commission to do as much work as you historically have done, too. And you know this, Craig. Typically, you guys don't end up having to do the research and do the writing and do all the thinking in terms of does this look make sense or not. Yeah, you really are much more on a policy basis where you are reviewing, saying, yes, this is what we want to see. You provide the direction, bring it back to us, and it goes back and forth. So you have a lot less of that responsibility. It tends to move faster, too, just because you're at key points and you're moving along.
Which was, the project plan I submitted was right along those lines, which was, naming responsibility, as Dave has mentioned a number of times in the past. And to me, knowing that none of us is full-time, none of us, we all have busy jobs and lives and things like that, to me, the majority of the comp plan task should be assigned to city staff, and they should bring drafts of the materials to us to approve.
And I'll distribute that to everybody, what Matt did put together, because it really was very well done.
Steve?
So basically what I understand you're saying, Dennis, is the process through the comp plan, the downtown plan, the Planning Commission normally does what the City Council did, where somebody hands them the plan and they look at it and tears it up and, and
well,
except
they really have more responsibility along the way. So you really divide it up in terms of key points. You've got kind of landmarks along the way that both groups have to kind of look at it and sign off so you can move forward. So you don't have this kind of delay in terms of getting that review.
But so getting back to that, to me, I look at it and say, to get it done effectively, the city should have a project manager assigned to it. The city should have, professional writers, whatever needs to be assigned to it. And process-wise, the Planning Commission should be, along those lines, the check-in point to check the project plan and say, yeah, we agree, to be a part of the feedback process. And, I look at the systems projects I've been a project manager on, and I work on the business side communicating to the programmers, and your responsibility is to translate the feedback from the customer into what that programmer needs, right? So there should be somebody from the city that works with Planning Commission, gets the feedback, and then takes it away and says, I'm going to write the document, and I'm going to come back to you and check in regularly, but in 3 months I'm going to bring you a draft. And that's how it should work.
And planning commission says, yes, you're right, no, you're wrong, you're this way. Yeah,
20,
right.
30, 40, 50, 60 hours of reviewing it is ridiculous, right? I mean, it should be a 90% complete product when it hits the planning commission, and that's about effective planning on the front end in project management.
Those are really the roles. Council sets the first direction. We're kind of the staff. Dennis and I are kind of your technical experts who are going to draft it. And you're the checks and balance. If we're not hitting what you need to hear, then we fix it.
And in all honesty, as much as I complain about council not giving us clear direction or identifying what's out of bounds, for at least the first year and a half, our singular failure was not giving staff clear direction, the same clear direction that we were asking for from City Council. And when City Council and staff determined to bring in a professional to try and make sense of it, quite frankly, we didn't improve on that process. I mean, that's a mea culpa. I freely admit it and my part in it. But we need to learn from that. We need to learn at this point what we have to take to City Council in order to get the direction that we're looking for. We have to identify step by step as we go where we go from here to make progress. And we have to keep at it, and even recognizing that we're doing things in parallel. Some are lower key than others. Some we have to try and make progress every meeting. So for right now, what we're trying to do is decide, okay, what between now and whenever we meet with City Council, what are the main things we want to take to them in terms of here are the main things we're going to tackle this year, and here's the thumbnail sketch of how we propose to go about it. So I don't think that's anything we can do in the next 23 minutes, but can we at least identify that short list and start thinking about it so at our next meeting?
Well, and that gets me to the agenda for the next meeting, because we have other issues to talk about tonight. And so what do we want as the agenda for the next meeting on the 23rd? We clearly need to identify to confirm the issues to address with the City Council, the four main issues as we talked about, unless you guys have something against identifying four main issues. No, sorry, Glenn.
Well, this is what I would like to propose. Going along the lines that we're going to be the ones doing the work is, because I have to sit down with the city manager and explain here's what we need to do and how we're going to do it, that I will present that to you on the 23rd. Now, if you feel that somehow we're missing the ball and something ought to come off that list and something else go on, we'll present that to City Council.
Okay, so that's one agenda item. Another agenda item. Do we want to, we talked.
I guess I was going to suggest that what seems to be low-hanging fruit to me is this PDO process. So if we could spend 45 minutes to an hour talking about what Glenn's going to bring to the table, and then the next hour saying, okay, here's how we think we should redefine the PDO process so we can have a proposal to the City Council for that. It seems like low-hanging fruit to me, but
I think the PDO process is a little bit premature until we hear what City Council is going to do, because what they mentioned in their council goals and objectives is the zoning code amendments, and that may or may not jive with the PDO process depending on their point of view. So my point is that might be a little premature at this point. I don't know what you guys feel.
Well, the two top topics that definitely rose to the top here, and I think regardless of, how we reword all of these or otherwise, I think it was quite clear the South Santa Fe corridor was a top priority, as is parking. So is there some action we can begin to take on either one of those? Do we again feel we have to wait for City Council direction on that, or has that already been very clear in all of the past conversations, all of the past meetings, to say we need to tackle these two?
The one unarguable is the comp plan update. The draft from City Council already identifies as a priority. We don't have to wait for them to tell us that. What we ought to be doing now is saying, okay, we agree, and here's how we propose to go about it, so we have something to talk about. We're on slightly shakier ground with the South Santa Fe corridor, although we have been telling them for 2 years that that's where we intended to go next. So we could profitably spend some time trying to develop where we intend to go with that, or how we intend to approach it, without already getting into sucking up staff resources to doing the legwork for it, but at least determine our approach. That gives us 2 reasonably solid issues to propose to council and to explain how we intend to go about it. Everything after that, PDO, TIS, parking, let's face it, that's going to take some professional insight from staff. It's going to take some research that hasn't necessarily been funded yet, and we won't find that out until council's had a chance to deal with it. But we can tell them it's on the horizon, that those are the kinds of issues that we'd like to start spending time on, because, very plainly and simply, we keep stumbling over it. We've been stumbling over it repeatedly.
But we got to prove that we can get something done. And that's where this is the beginning.
So start with the first 2. Start with the comp plan update and South Santa Fe corridor, and then say, in addition to that, because through our discussions over the last 3 years, we've all agreed that these 3-4 topics need to be worked on. Before we start committing resources, let's get your concurrence that those are important for this year, and then we'll start laying out how we propose to go about it.
So again, on the agenda, we'll have the city staff propose the priorities to us for confirmation on the 23rd. Other agenda items, I mean, do you guys agree that we should hold off on doing the PDO process until another time? Another thing we could do is we could start hearing a presentation of the inventory of the South Santa Fe corridor, but my hesitation with that is that we haven't, it's just an inventory, and we get to see what's along the Santa Fe corridor, and we still haven't set the boundaries of what are our neighborhood characteristics that we want to look at. What is the boundary of the Santa Fe corridor?
How about we, this for proposal, we go through the list of priorities that Glenn's going to define, and then since there are several of us that are newbies, why don't we, along the lines of what Dave is saying, is decide, okay, well, what are we going to do? And what is our responsibility as a team here with the South Santa Fe corridor?
Our starting point with the comp plan update 4 years ago was, at least ostensibly, it started out that way, somehow we got off track. What works and what doesn't work? What's current, what's out of date, where do we need to improve? So I would suggest that those of us who aren't intimately familiar with what's in the comp plan right now for South Santa Fe corridor, go through it, look at it, think about it, go and walk or drive around it and say, okay, what's changed from what this says? What doesn't sound like it's all that pertinent? What looks like it may be changing the rules or changing the,
Okay,
the trends?
Steve?
Yes. Current plan for this South Santa Fe corridor, they have a study, right? Is what is?
There's actually a plan that's the last chapter in comp plan that was adopted, and that's the second plan that was adopted for South Santa Fe. And then there's design standards and guidelines beyond that. So it's a little confusing as to what is what, but if you look at the last chapter of comp plan, that's the adopted neighborhood plan for the corridor.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
So,
the blue one, the 1981?
Yeah.
so we have a proposal on the table to look at the responsibility of the Planning Commission for the Santa Fe corridor, or we can look at some inventories. Jenny?
I guess with the Santa Fe corridor, having not addressed it, and I guess I'm still not I'm not clear why this is a really high priority with the Planning Commission is the Santa Fe corridor. I understand that it's an area of change, but I'm wondering, yes, it's an area of change, but I'm wondering, it's underneath the overall comp plan. So it's basically identifying that this is the biggest area of change within the comp plan. Is that correct?
Actually,
Yes.
it wasn't underneath it. If we put any credence at all into the rankings, it was number one. That was the only thing that got nearly everybody to put a high number on it.
Well, and previous planning commissions also voted that that's the number, that was the next area that we wanted to move to. Steve?
In fact, city council, when we first had our discussions with them, we were at the South Santa Fe corridor or downtown. Which one should you do first? And they went with downtown because that's the most variety to where it affects everybody in the town. So we needed to work with the downtown first, and then we could proceed to the other ones. But
There is, as they say, a history.
yeah, we were between the two plans on which one we were going to start with.
All right, thank you. I wanted to see a little bit of the history of why that was so highly ranked.
Yeah.
And I do understand it's an area of change.
Yeah, my take on it is, if we're going to do one area, and then, if we're going to look at doing the whole city, we've already done the downtown area. Then once we do the South Santa Fe area, after that, all the neighborhoods are pretty much the same. Okay, I happen to live in the South Santa Fe area, and I do realize that my neighborhood is different than everybody else in this room except for Linda's neighborhood, because she's my neighbor. So, everybody here has a different neighborhood than we have. When we would sit down to do Matt's neighborhood plan, it's not going to be too much different than if we do Jen's or Kurt's, or, they're all pretty much all going to be the same. But the South Santa Fe plan is going to be special. It's going to be a lot different because it's so commercial. It's so commercial and very little retail, and a lot of area that has not been developed or is ready to be redeveloped or is zoned incorrectly, or, many issues going on with that area.
And part of going through the process, we can identify those issues, and that might help us build the neighborhood, identify some neighborhood characteristics that we want to look at pretty routinely, because there's so many weird things going on there. And also it might help us define the neighborhood boundaries. Sorry. So in terms of our second agenda item, do we, first of all, want to do something with regard to the Santa Fe corridor?
Well, I think all we're trying to say is, let's start talking about it. Let's bring it to the table. Let's make sure we're all up to speed, understand what it is, what we're talking about, and then we can start saying, what are the things we need to start addressing? Do we still have the right boundaries? Do we have the boundaries changed? Do we need direction from city? So let's at least all get on the same page and level of understanding of the corridor, and then begin the process of saying, how do we tackle this, taking into account the learnings from the downtown plan. I think we can adapt or enhance the process, from all the learnings, and say, okay, we know what the end state is, what we want to try, what does a revised plan intend to look like? What are some of the things that we're going to do in our process this year in order to get there? So we just start moving.
So we all agree to look at the Santa Fe corridor at the next meeting? Everybody?
And I think that's enough. I think those two things will take up the whole meeting.
Yeah. Now, does that work with you, Dennis and Glenn?
Yeah.
You sure? It will take a lot of discussion.
If we're looking at that, can we have maps of the current Santa Fe corridor?
It's in comp plan. I would start with
Actually,
that.
it isn't.
There's no map of it in here.
No.
It says, map is available at community.
Oh, really? Oh,
development.
okay. We'll get you maps.
I've chafed over that for the last 4
Oh,
years.
really? Okay, we'll get you
And
maps.
that's going to be one of the first items of discussion, is the boundaries of the South Santa Fe corridor, because the part of the downtown area.
Because we may go this way or that way, or make it larger or smaller.
And I think boundaries is a real key one, because if you look at the map, one of the things we want to do at some point is you go back and a lot of the neighborhoods, boundary areas at least of Littleton were not in the city when the comp plan was initially done, and so we have areas that are left out. The southwest corner of the city is not in the plan.
We have a map of what it is now and then what's around it, so that
Okay, good.
And
So we can,
Can we also have, Glenn, can your team identify what we need to define?
Well,
I mean,
what I
honestly,
was going to suggest is read the plan that you have now, and if, like Steve has familiarity. If there's issues that you see now, let's start an issue list.
And the other thing we're going to have to recognize is we managed to finesse pretty much the question of, do things really change right at a boundary, or do they bleed over with the downtown, okay? As we get into the South Santa Fe corridor, we're not going to have that luxury. We're going to have, and that's why bringing up the what's around it is important, because we're going to have to start considering that. We're going to have to figure out how we systematically address that, not just for South Santa Fe corridor, but through the rest of the community. It isn't hard lines. There are bleed overs and sharing.
We have to start thinking about, do we make something an island? Do we set it apart? You know, because we defined these boundaries, is there something sitting out here that doesn't have a home?
So
Yeah, that's a good point.
we'll definitely do that.
Oops.
Can we move real quick before
On your own.
Matt has to leave to talk about the city council meeting on next Tuesday, the 17th? And just generally say that,
Next Tuesday, the 17th, the downtown neighborhood plan will be coming to the planning commission for hopefully their final approval. I think right now I envision just making a quick presentation on the changes and where we, commission agreed. And hopefully some of you can be there if questions do come up, but at this point, I think we're in good shape.
Just for quick clarification, it goes to city council next Tuesday, so I think it mistakenly said planning commission, but.
Did I? Sorry.
We're
Sorry. City council.
We're deep into planning commission.
and I think the intention is that there may not necessarily be discussion that they approve what they get based on that. So, am I right with saying that?
You're an optimist, but okay.
The intention is that what we submitted to them will not change.
So it's an up or
Absolutely
down
right.
vote.
Pretty good.
I'll light a candle for you.
They'll be getting the same documents that you got. One is all the changes and then the final document. So.
And so, Glenn, discussion of other meetings?
The one thing, I did send you out something about the mind mixer demonstration. If you can make it, great. If you can't, that's all right. Don't worry about it. But I did want to mention, Councilmember Taylor wants the Planning Commission to come if you can. There's a Tri-Cities meeting where we're going to be talking about what Jenny wanted to talk about, was the Boomer Bond initiative from Dr. Cog. And the Tri-Cities is Sheridan, help me out, Dennis. Englewood and Littleton, right. And that meeting will be on, let me find my notes here. It's Friday, I think it's Friday the 27th. Be a breakfast meeting, start at 7:30. Here's all the details. It's going to be at Red and Jerry's. I'm sure you all know where that is, 1840 Oxford, 7:30 to 9 o'clock. And yes, that's Friday, January 27th.
And do we need RSVPs on that?
Yes, by January 20th. And you can either send those to me. In fact, yes, send them to me if you can make it on that date by the 20th. And then I'll update Marlene, who's making all the arrangements upstairs.
Anything else?
That's it for me.
Before we move to Jenny, does anybody else have anything?
I have one quick question for Glenn. You had started a parking lot with items, remember?
Oh, yes, right.
I think that's a good idea to keep that parking lot and keep it going as we go through this next plan, and maybe even attach it to our agenda. These are the parking lot items, so that if we have a moment, we can get back to one of those parking lot items or bring it up again if it's something that we found interesting or
Good point.
needs more information.
Point. I like that idea.
A bucket list, whatever you want.
Sorry.
Yeah, and that keeps it in front of us, too. Anything else before we get to Jenny? Jenny, the floor is yours.
Okay. All right. Well, Glenn already brought up the Dr. Cog, the Denver Regional Council of Governments, their the Boomer Bond project, and I went to. They had a meeting for anyone who was interested in wanting to get involved on any of the teams, and so I went, and so I'm going to be on the housing and the community design team. So. We'll get some feedback
Excellent.
on that. But essentially, the goal of it, and it's going to be happening within this next year, and the goal is really to provide direction to cities on goals, policies, and then to develop like a toolkit that cities can use to help the aging population. And that's the thrust. And really for the city of Littleton, we have the second highest population in the metropolitan area for 65 plus age residents. So, I mean, really, I think it'll impact us even, it'll be very important for our residents and to see what comes out of this. So they had 2 meetings already, and there's a number of people who have signed up for the group. So I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it, and I think it'll be helpful for the city of Littleton. So.
I feel old.
You're bringing that demographic down.
Or up, depending on your point of view. So do we have anything else, any comments about today's meeting? And then if there's none, we can...
I just want to clarify and thank Dave for pointing out that I did say eliminate the subjectivity. So I do want to clarify that statement. For me, what I'm trying to articulate is that we cannot just rely on that information. I believe there's other information available to us that we can make an informed decision based on our opinions as a planning commission, the representation of people of the city, as well as guidance with whether it's demographics, traffic patterns, zoning, et cetera, that help outline boundaries. So I just wanted to clarify my intent of that statement.
I didn't really think you were dismissing public opinion.
Just wanted to make sure it was, for the record, clear.
Jenny?
I have one more thing. I think it would be helpful for our next meeting. I'd like to maybe go through Matt's project plan, and I think it'd be great to discuss it amongst the planning commissioners. 'Cause, I think it'll help us move along the process faster, and it'll make us more efficient. So it'd be great to go through that.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any help? If we get a good, solid project plan, that'll make us move so much faster through the entire process. So.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor? Dave's not voting. Thank you all.
So they say.